An Inspiration series story brought to you by the Story Vault. A cruise to second chances. Pikenhoe had been married to his wife Lisa for 5 years. They were what you might call a loving couple. Lisa was known to be one of the kindest and most beautiful women in her neighborhood. With only one child, a boy named Bliss, they had enough time to focus on each other without the demands that often come with a large family. Lisa worked from home, which allowed her to keep things in order and prepare warm meals for her husband. Everything seemed just as it should be, until the day Mr. Pikenhoe lost his job. Unable to cope, he turned to alcohol, drinking heavily to drown his depression. He would come home late, drunk, and collapse onto the fresh sheets Lisa had laid out. The drinking soon gave way to rage. He started calling Lisa names, then hitting her. Eventually, his temper reached their son. He would insult Bliss, and worse, strike him too. One afternoon, while Lisa was picking vegetables in the garden, she heard a scream. Rushing inside, she found Bliss with a bloody nose. His father had hurt him again. That was the final straw. Lisa had tolerated too much for too long, hiding her shame and shielding her husband. Now, she was done. The next day, Lisa reported her husband to the welfare office. The abuse, the drinking, the job loss, which had all spiraled for over a year. Mr. Pikenhoe had tried to find work, but no one kept him on for long, not with his behavior. Meanwhile, Lisa became the breadwinner, covering Bliss's schooling and the household bills. And still, the abuse continued. Though the thought of starting over was heavy, especially after pouring so much of herself into the marriage, Lisa knew she could not stay. She signed the divorce papers. Her husband, too drunk to steady his hand, barely scrawled his name. Lisa was granted custody of Bliss and moved out with her modest savings. She took a job at a small bookstore in a new town, far from the memories of her old life and far from her husband. Though still beautiful, she realized she had almost nothing to wear beyond a few faded, outdated dresses. For 5 years, she had been mostly confined to the house. Now, out in the world again, she promised herself she'd buy some modest but beautiful clothes and some makeup, even some eyelashes, ones she had often admired on other women, but never dared try herself. She also bought a pair of stylish pumps that strained her budget, but she didn't mind. At work, she met women her age who looked and smelled radiant. She thought of how much she had missed, being absorbed in homemaking, parenting, and surviving, with no time to simply enjoy life. More than anything, she realized how the feeling of being trapped had quietly stolen years of her joy. Now determined to reclaim that joy, she created a new rhythm: drop Bliss at school, work, pick him up in the afternoon, and then head to the gym. She started exercising, just a little, to tone up and feel better in her body. Still, the memories of her abusive marriage would return like crashing waves. The hurt, the shame, the bitterness. She had told herself many times she'd forgiven him, but each time the memories surged, it felt like she would drown in them. So she made a bold choice. She began writing Pikenhoe letters, one each month, filled with kind, encouraging words. He never replied, but she wrote them anyways. As time passed, Lisa began to allow herself to dream again. She imagined remarrying one day, this time to a kind and gentle man. Often, as she sat in her garden, she pictured the trip to France she had always longed to take with Mr. Pikenhoe, but never could because of their financial struggles. She saw herself walking beneath the Eiffel Tower, exploring the Louvre, and taking a cruise ship to the south of France. Each time the vivid dream would dissolve into reality, leaving a tear in her eye but also a quiet determination in her heart. This time, it will happen. One late afternoon, just after picking Bliss up from school and before heading to the gym, someone knocked on the door. It was their old neighbor, Mr. Trombone. He looked concerned.
"It's your husband," he said. "He's very sick. Dying. And I didn't know who else to turn to."
Lisa was stunned. Why would Mr. Trombone come to her of all people? She and Mr. Pikenhoe were divorced. Didn't he have distant relatives somewhere? Mr. Trombone's eyes searched hers, uncertain whether Lisa would even consider going. Her past with Mr. Pikenhoe was no secret.
For a long moment, she stood frozen. Then with a soft sigh, she turned and said, "Wait here. I'll get my things."
She left Bliss with a trusted neighbor whose grandson was about his age, then climbed into Mr. Trombone's car for the long drive, 7 hours, back to Baron Bawara. When they arrived, the scene broke her heart. The house was a wreck. Dirty clothes, cigarette stubs, empty beer cans, and unwashed dishes. The air was heavy with the stench of neglect. Mr. Pickenhoe lay in bed, soaked in sweat, too weak to even lift his head. He had no money to go to the hospital. Lisa borrowed Mr. Trombone's car again, and with his help, carried Mr. Pickenhoe to the vehicle. They drove to the nearest hospital, where he was admitted in critical condition. For the 4 days he remained in the hospital, Lisa cleaned the house and prepared his favorite warm chicken soup, delivering it faithfully each day.
Slowly, he regained his strength. One morning, sitting up with effort, he looked at her, his voice raspy from years of alcohol, and said, "Thank you. I don't deserve this, but thank you, Liz."
Lisa met his eyes calmly and said, "Promise yourself you'll change, not me."
She took the train back to her town and back to Bliss. Mr. Pickenhoe, now more sober than he had been in years, eventually relocated to a different town. For 2 years, neither he nor Lisa wrote again. Their lives quietly moved forward, separate, silent. One Monday morning, tragedy struck. Lisa was hit by a drunk driver on her way to work and rushed to the hospital unconscious. Bliss, now a college junior, was overwhelmed. Unsure of what to do, he made a difficult decision: to find his father. Leaving Lisa in the hospital's care, Bliss returned to his childhood town, Baron Bawara, hoping for some lead. The first person he met was none other than Mr. Trombone. The old man's face lit up when he opened the door to find a grown-up Bliss standing before him.
"You're Lisa's boy," he said with emotion.
Bliss nodded and explained everything.
Mr. Trombone shook his head sadly. "Your father moved to another town years ago. We spoke once after he left. Just once. I suggested he visit a therapy center in that town, but I don't know if he ever went."
It wasn't much, but it was a place to start. Mr. Trombone gave Bliss the name of the town and the center, then invited him to sleep over before continuing his search. The next morning, Bliss caught the early train from Twinkle Eye Station for the 8-hour journey to the town of Blue Blueberries. Though tired, he was filled with quiet resolve. Upon arriving, he headed straight for the therapy center. He explained his mission to the receptionist, who typed on the old desktop computer in front of him.
After a few moments, the man looked up with a smile. "Yes," he said. "Mr. Pickenhoe was here. He began therapy with us about 1.5 years ago. Fortunately, he chose to fill in his address on the form that all patients were asked to complete, though there was an option not to."
But when Bliss asked for his father's address, the staff hesitated, saying they weren't allowed to share it. They even doubted if Mr. Pickenhoe was still living there. The uncertainty sent a fresh wave of worry through Bliss. But when he showed who he was and presented some credentials, the staff reluctantly gave him the address. The knot in Bliss's stomach tightened as he stepped away from the charity therapy center. As he left, he noticed a man in a long navy blue coat and hat walking just ahead of him. Where did this man materialize from, he wondered. The man was about 200 meters ahead, as if silently guiding the way. Bliss found it strange and unsettling, because no one else left the premises with him, but he was too tired and hungry to dwell on it. He shook off the feeling and pressed on. His destination was Sweetcakes, a 30-minute bus ride from Blue Blueberries. Every step felt heavier with the weight of unknowns. At the bus station, Bliss glanced at his watch and felt a flicker of relief. The bus came, and he climbed aboard. When the bus arrived in Sweetcakes, Bliss stepped off and crossed the road. He made his way toward a hamburger stand, hoping to grab some food. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the same man from the therapy center. In that instant, Bliss felt it was more than just coincidence now. As the man hailed a taxi, Bliss heard him clearly say, "The Pickenhoe's establishment." The name hit Bliss like a punch. His breath caught, and then he ran towards the man and politely asked if he could share his ride. The man shrugged, gesturing for him to get in. When they arrived, Bliss got out, but before he could pay the driver and thank the stranger, he was gone. Confused but preoccupied by the weight of his emotions, Bliss turned toward the building ahead. His eyes locked on the bold gold letters high on the wall, the Pick and Hose establishment. For a moment, disbelief washed over him. What Bliss didn't know was that when his father left Baron Bawara, he had made a silent vow to see his therapy through. He carried with him all of Lisa's letters, the only thing that had kept him tethered to hope. With a mixture of nervousness and determination, Bliss stepped inside. He approached the reception and asked to see Mr. Pickenhoe. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," Bliss answered quickly, "but I'm his son." "Mr. Pickenhoe has never mentioned family," she said quietly. She made a quick call, then instructed him to go upstairs to Mr. Pickenhoe's secretary. Climbing the stairs, Bliss's heart pounded. At the secretary's door, he was told to wait. 5 minutes felt like an eternity before he was finally ushered into a grand office. There, sitting calmly in a leather chair, was his father, refined, reformed, and unmistakably changed. Bliss's voice trembled as he whispered, "Dad." His dad rose slowly, tears streaming down his cheeks, and embraced Bliss in a tight, trembling hug. Neither of them spoke. Words seemed too fragile for the weight of the moment. The joy swelling inside Mr. Pickenhoe was almost indescribable. He clasped his hands together, bowing his head. Finally, Mr. Pickenhoe lifted his head and asked softly about Lisa. When Bliss shared the news of her accident, his father's face fell. Without hesitation, he dropped everything, and they quickly made their way out. 3 days later, Lisa's eyes fluttered open, and the last thing she expected to see was Mr. Pickenhoe sitting quietly by her bedside. It was not the man who had hurt her, but the one who had finally remembered who he was, the man who had healed. Weeks passed, and though Lisa grew stronger, her recovery was slow. Mr. Pickenhoe made the journey back and forth from Sweetcakes to her town, remaining steadfastly by her side. One quiet morning, as Lisa rested in bed, there was a soft knock at the door. The flower delivery man handed her a bouquet of deep red roses and left. Attached to the flowers was a small white envelope. With curiosity sparkling in her eyes, Lisa opened it to find a ticket for a cruise to France. A long-forgotten dream reignited, now was within reach. Shaking slightly, she called for Bliss, who rushed in, fearing something was wrong. Instead, he found his mother smiling like the world had suddenly grown brighter. They both wondered who had sent the gift, but knew without doubt it was Mr. Pickenhoe. Only he and Bliss had known of her cherished dream to see France. The next day Mr. Pickenhoe returned. Lisa thanked him softly for the flowers and the ticket, confessing that she knew it was him. With a small, hopeful smile, he reached out, gently lifting her hand in his. In a voice heavy with regret but laced with hope, he asked, "Liz, can you permit us start all over again, or is it too late?" Lisa looked deeply into his eyes and said, "It's never too late to start over." 2 days later, Lisa was discharged from the hospital and preparations were made for the voyage. On Friday evening, they went aboard the Fortunata, and on the quiet evening of Saturday, as the Fortunata quietly glided its way through the clear waters of the moonlit evening and starlit skies, on that cruise, among the ocean's quiet waves, the Pickenhoes remarried and began all over. It was the cruise to second chances. The past was not erased, but it had been transformed, and each had made room, the one for forgiveness and the other for change. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is freedom. Bitterness traps the mind in survival mode. Forgiveness frees it, opening new doors. Long before modern science confirmed this truth, Christ Jesus taught plainly, "Forgive, and you will be forgiven." Luke 6:37. This wasn't a transactional or legal exchange, but the profound act of releasing another to free oneself. Lisa forgave her husband, not because he deserved it, but because she too deserved it. And in doing so, she did not just restore a broken man, she restored herself. Story by Stella Ney. Please like, subscribe and share to enjoy more stories from the Story Vault.